I'll concede your point just for brevity. But
What? Brevity? We don't do that around here. It's probably
No.
Citrus, or what is a Capital One Bowl? It used to be Citrus Bowl, right?
oh my
Capital
God,
One.
dude, where have you been?
I just like the real name.
It hasn't been the Citrus Bowl since like what 2002?
What was your highlight side dish from Thanksgiving?
Oh gosh, Scotch.
This is the BuckAround, the podcast devoted to all things Wisconsin Badger football from a fan perspective. Featuring your hosts, Richard Branch and Maxwell Brusky.
And hello, everyone, and welcome back to the BuckAround. Welcome back to episode 315 of the BuckAround. I am one half of said BuckAround, and man, my co-host, who is the, I'm going to say unnecessarily apologetic co-host, Maxwell Brusky, is with me. Did make me laugh before we started. Max, how are you, sir?
I'm good. We had a nice pregame, I think.
We did. We got the blood flowing. There was a lot of yelling.
Got the blood flowing.
Yeah, so...
And that's not like the blood flowing, or there was no blood flying. That's not what I was apologetic about. No physical violence, no nothing like that.
None. But you were going to be apologetic about us being gone for so long. But the reason it was unnecessary was it wasn't your fault. It was actually mine. We did promise everyone we'd be back last week, but I've been playing around. With today's episode is brought to you by Pivot Tables. Let's just say that. That's our sponsor for today's episode. And I've been working on this fourth down project for a while and did not.
And I say again, you get to the advanced level of Excel or Google Sheets when you're proficient at Pivot Tables.
Proficient is a strong word.
I am still not there yet. I can do just about everything except for pivot tables and VLOOKUP.
VLOOKUP is my wife's domain. I don't go near there. But
those are the two things.
I wouldn't call myself proficient. It's more like I'm just walking around in a dark cave with a torch and I'm just finding things on the wall. That's about my level of proficiency with pivot tables. But we are here. You did want to clarify right off the bat that despite what people might think on Twitter, you are not the Chicago Badger. Is that correct?
I am not. No, I am not. And that comes up in the context of the hot recruiting run that the Badgers are on right now, and it's official visit season. So you see a lot of Twitter activity.
You do.
From certain accounts.
And Matt Mitchell made a point to say he wants to meet this because I have to say, I wasn't sure if it wasn't you because it does say in the bio, Chicago lawyer, right? So that checks the box.
I think it's a Chicago Badger in Illinois lawyer, I think. And if it's not my friend that lives down the block, I don't think it's him either, although he's kind of interesting tweeter.
Well, I mean,
look me up offline and I'll tell you what his account is, and you're gonna be like, oh, that guy's your neighbor?
Oh wow.
Because he goes by his name, so.
So, yeah, no, I mean, I've just always known this person is prolific and they never rest. And if that was you, I was like, Max, when do you have time for anything?
Yeah, that's true.
Because this person is dedicated to, yes.
That was crazier than the 2014 and 2015 Liberty Bowl Max days.
Exactly. So we're back. We did, like I said, we were held up for a little bit because of me, partly, but also I'm kind of glad we sat for a week because official visit season, hence the discussion of recruiting that we just had and recruit-centric accounts on the social medias. It was a big couple weeks for the Badgers. They picked up, let me see, one, two, three, four, five, I think 6 players in the last, let's say, month. With I think 5 of them in the last 2.5 weeks, or give or take. Yeah, it feels like a good time to sort of take the temperature of Badger recruiting, right? They've got their quarterback. They got 2 receivers.
That said, since we're talking about tweets, I think maybe now is a good time to talk about, because I when we were kind of pregame in there, I said I had a tweet for you to look at. And this is from Badger Recruiting, Badger_recruiting.
Okay.
And it says, I quote, "It's incredible how much the hashtag Badger staff has retooled/upgraded this roster!" ! And so to what you just said, he has, or she, it's a Twitter account, so I don't know. QB current and future upgrades there. I don't know if there's any in this recruiting cycle that has anything to do with that. At least not yet.
Well, I mean, here's the one thing I would say. Like, I mean, Landon Locke. So here's a funny thing. Do you know where Landon Locke is in this recruiting class in terms of where he's rated?
Yeah, and I looked over the list, and like I don't know if I had to go all the way to the bottom to get to there.
He's
and
second to last.
Nothing against, there's nothing against Landon Locke, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, there's Landon Locke.
Yep.
So.
Until 2 days ago, and we are recording on Tuesday, June 11th, he was the lowest rated commit in the class.
Right.
But
he's not anymore, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, like that cornerback they brought in, Jamari Washington. I'm looking at the composite, by the way, not just 24/7. You got to change it to composite if you look at the list. That's why maybe you and I are seeing something different. But what I was going to say is I do think there is something to be said in terms of they get a quarterback early. I mean, if we're breaking this tweet down as we go, I would say number one, they get a quarterback that they want early. I mean, he's been committed for a year. So, yes. All right, continue.
Okay. Current and future. I probably agree with that. I don't know what Landon Locke's going to be like, but hey, we'll see. RB bringing back #RB.
They have not recruited a running back who's really played yet, so I can't say that.
I can't say that either. And they don't have like the plan A guy or plan B guy or whatever for this cycle.
Right.
They're still out there and uncommitted anyway, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think they've missed on anybody, but okay. All right. Here's one for you now. Okay. WR/TE, dynamic talent and speed.
I don't know what to make of. All I'd say is the tight end is a different body style.
Right. But the film looked kind of cool.
And I don't know anything about Cam Miller other than I feel like they have plenty of slot receivers. That's not where they are. They're in need, even now or next year. But yeah, sure. Okay. I mean, look, this isn't knocking. I'm not sitting here trying to pick on this person. I just more like, I get the approach of these accounts. They are always positive. I get it. Like they want to be hyped, and that's cool. That's totally cool. That's people work differently than me.
And don't get me wrong. I'm not, I didn't bring that up to, beat anybody up either. I just thought it was a nice, it was a nice summary. Actually, it was a nice shorthand for the class so far. Okay. O-line returning to #O-line you. That seems pretty spot on to me.
Again,
and they took a lot in the class that's going to be here in the fall, but they're looking at 4. I think they're
one more. They're trying to get.
I thought they had 3, and then they're trying to get 1 more.
No, they have 4.
Right, they're trying to get 1 more
because they have Powell, the in-state guy, Roski or Rusky. I actually don't know how you say his name.
I think it's Rusky. Yeah.
Nolan Davenport and Cam Clark. So Davenport
I forgot about Clark.
And Powell were the guys the 2 they just got because they just got 2, and they're waiting on that. The one other guy who I think has
Hardy Watts.
Thank you. Who's got a Michigan visit. So, yeah, I mean, here's what I would say. I think the argument is more from last year, which was something I was going to touch on a bit later. But, you know who the highest rated guy in last year's class was? It's Kevin Haywood.
Yes.
He was I think on 24/7, I think he was like a top 50. And I think in his composite, he's still, I think maybe top 80. I mean, he was a top 100 for sure. When they got him, he was a 3-star kid. Yeah. So he clearly, they did their homework on the evaluation there. So
I had forgotten that I had forgotten that his ratings had started where they started. I'd forgotten that, but I know he was the highest rated guy they brought in.
Yeah, he was an 88 to start.
Interesting. Well, so there's some, I think returning to O-line U, we'll have to see how they pan out because that reputation comes from what happens in the NFL. I think a lot of it does. So
yes.
We'll see. DL prioritizing some all caps dogs.
Well, I'm glad they're prioritizing them. They don't have any.
Right. I was going to say the same thing. And I don't think the previous staff didn't prioritize dogs either.
I don't know what that means, but I mean, they did okay last year. I mean, I think Ernest Willer last year was a sneaky pull. We'll see if he turns out any good or if he turns into Arrington Farrar. You know what I mean? Like we're one of these guys who comes out of nowhere at the end and then didn't really do anything.
And didn't really do much. Yeah. Okay. LB, rangy and athletic. I think you put a check mark for last class, this class.
Transfer. I mean, I think you know what they're at.
I don't really talk transfers necessarily, but because we're talking recruiting. But all right, so that's cool. I shouldn't say we're talking recruiting, we're talking high school recruiting. All right, and then the last one, DBs, the boys coming in, are all caps different with 4 exclamation. That I think we can agree with, right?
I mean, they're bigger.
Yeah.
They're definitely bigger. And
are they higher rated?
Maybe a scoonch. I actually I don't have it side by side. I mean, that's something we could look at, but I probably not. I mean, not that I would say is statistically significant. I just think the body type is clearly different.
Yeah, there's also some weird vibe thing that I feel like they're a better caliber of cornerback for some reason, but that's totally subjective and not. I don't think it's backed up by anything other than, oh, you know what? I feel like those guys look better than those guys did.
I think it's. Yes, I think you're right. And I would agree. I'm kind of giving them that benefit of the doubt too, just because I'm not looking at a team that is, well, I guess I give them benefit of the doubt on their track record, which maybe is, am I being, no, I don't think I'm being inconsistent with that compared to the other positions because they haven't shown me anything on defensive line yet. They haven't shown me anything yet at linebacker. I think it's pointing in the right direction, but they haven't shown me. Like I've seen I've seen the defensive back use Nizer Forkreen. They brought in a guy who I think if you put him on those 2017, 2018, 2016 teams where you had sort of the rotation of the Darren Harrells and the Dante Carrier, he wouldn't have been a rotation guy. He would have just risen above all them. Do you know what I mean?
I do. Yeah.
And I feel like they seem to kind of know what they're doing at corner and making guys better cornerbacks. I mean, I think even you could argue Ricardo Hallman took a step up because of them. He was a real good corner, but I think I
wonder. So I was going to say, is there a Sauce Gardner in the future? Because they had, not just with him, but they had a couple of other cornerbacks drafted, right? And I think was there another first rounder? I felt like there was.
I think there was a safety, but
maybe. Yeah.
You're asking me about NFL drafts. I mean, Max.
No. I know that. No, I know that. But the staff, Fickell and Tressel have kind of had that thing.
Yeah.
That's what if you were looking at one thing that you'd be hyped about based on past results, other than taking Cincinnati to the playoff, that would be it. Is finding cornerbacks and making them into first round NFL quarterbacks. I don't know if that's here yet, but
yeah, we'll see.
So anyway, I thought that was a nice way to
kick us off. Yeah, and it actually ties pretty close to what I was saying.
Right.
So which was, right, so right now in the class they have a quarterback, 2 wide receivers, 4 offensive linemen, 2 inside linebackers, 1 outside, 3 corners, and 3 safeties as projected currently to where guys are going to end up. Do any of those numbers surprise you in terms of what they're taking?
Feel like there should be more wide receivers, but other than that, no, not really.
So interesting. So I was looking at wide receiver myself, and you have, Cam Miller's another slot guy, and you have Tretch, who's young, and you go, where are you going from there? You need an outside body, and I guess they're looking at. It's not 2 wide receivers. It's 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end. I said that wrong, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say. But you need a couple outside dudes.
Well, because you've got Bryson Green's done after this year. What do you think? If Will Pauling does the same thing, does he leave?
I kind of feel like he
you?
Could.
But do you think he did? I just don't know. What is the market in the NFL for that guy in the draft?
Good. Now that's a good point.
That's more what I'm wondering because he's not big.
That's a good point. He's not gonna be first, second, third round, fourth round.
I mean, he's a late guy, and I always wonder with a guy like that, is there an NIL component that keeps you around? I mean, there's guaranteed money, it's legit now.
Well, and I'm thinking of the teams that in the NFL, the teams that I know at least a little bit about their roster. The Packers or Bears, Lions. They don't have anybody comparable to that. I don't think they do.
That are 5'10" wide receivers, and
no.
There's not a lot. I mean, unless
there was a guy, Blitnikoff Award winner. How big was Golden Tate? Do you remember?
He was over 6 feet, I bet.
I feel like he was, but I always think of him as being more of a smaller guy like that, in my head.
He was 5'11".
Yeah.
So,
okay. Yeah. So I wasn't far off.
No,
so there you
weren't.
go. How big is Amon St. Rob? He's over 6 feet, I think.
St. Brown is 6 feet.
Or St. Brown, 6 feet. So there's another one.
Yeah.
And he's a star.
Yeah, but I mean, Will Pauling is 5'10".
Yeah.
Like,
well, it's maybe 5'10 and a half. It's
5'10".
I don't think I'm taller than him, but maybe I am.
He's taller than Tretch. I can tell you that because I've seen them standing next to each other.
I'm taller than Tretch, yes. Nope.
But yeah, so I guess that's more, but to your point, here's what you're wondering about next year. Bryson Green's definitely gone. Maybe Will Pauling, but then that's kind of it. I mean, Hawk and Anderson, but I don't really count him. But the thing is, the year after that, you're definitely losing Pauling, definitely losing Vinny Anthony, definitely losing CJ Williams, and, lest we not forget Joseph Griffin, our new favorite Badger from Boston College. So you're going to have, if it's not 2 this year and 3 the following year, it's 1 next year and 4 the following year. So you kind of need a body now. So I would agree you probably need 1 or 2. They are in the mix for that Hilton guy.
Yeah, they are. And you know what? I didn't see. There wasn't like a crystal ball for him that went Wisconsin.
Yeah, there was.
Was there? Or
yes.
There was. I thought I saw that. Yeah.
So what was interesting to me is like none of the numbers do. Like the 3 corners make sense. At first I was like 3 safeties, but then you look at the roster and you go, yeah, Woller's a senior, Brown's a junior, Latu's done, he's a grad, and then Zachman's a senior next year. So like, okay, I get it. Okay. So yeah, the numbers don't really surprise me. The only thing I said, that's left, which is what you touched on, a running back, but they seem to be holding on to A-list dudes. Like they're waiting on this Byron Lewis guy.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think in this cycle, do you need to take one?
No.
And if you got plan A 4-star guy, you take him.
Yes.
But if you don't, you're okay I think you're okay this cycle to hold on.
Well, it looks like, so they just had that Byron Lewis guy on campus. There was the one guy from New Jersey. It's either Foster or Forster. I can't remember his name.
I think it's Forster, yeah.
That they were going to have him, but I think they pushed him off, which either means they feel good about this running back, or maybe it's like him or nothing. Or maybe they play on somebody late, but I feel like running backs are kind of done. There aren't late running backs.
Yeah, I feel like that too. Yeah.
There's late defensive linemen. Just when teams take multiples at a position, there are guys that kind of shuffle down. Mm-hmm. But the only takeaway I had that I'll admit, like I'm a bit not bummed, I guess is the right word, but I was kind of interested to see like if this trend would continue. One of the underrated things, or I feel like unheralded things that's happened in Luke Fickell's tenure thus far, was he actually, for the first time in Wisconsin history, hit the blue chip ratio, if you know what that is. That's that Bud Elliott metric, which is basically take the 24/7 composite. Every team that wins the national title has at least 50% of their roster as a 4-star recruit in the composite. That's There's only been one team that's won it in, I think, since the BCS era. So it's like coming on 20 years now, basically since recruiting started, since the databases started. And that was Auburn with Cam Newton, because you had a generational talent at one position,
Even that team didn't meet the ratio?
Didn't meet the ratio. I think that was the one. Yeah, gosh, Oregon didn't meet it.
Farley
and that's the thing is Oregon.
Those running backs? Wow, that's crazy.
And they beat Oregon by a point. And because Oregon didn't meet it either, which is kind of like, it's almost like an asterisk on it. Because every other time you have an elite level team in the title game, and they always have 50% blue chip players. Wisconsin last year, for the first time ever, hit that. They had, 22 guys, I think? They had 11 guys in the blue chip ratio. Right now, they have 1, 2, 3 out of 16. And if they, so again, it's Tuesday at 1:30 in the afternoon on the East Coast here. I feel like I'm doing drive time radio. But that guy Posa in New Mexico is announcing Thursday is a Badger lean. He would be another one. So they get 4 out of 17. Pretend they get T.Y. Hilton's kid, the kid in Indianapolis or somewhere in Indiana, that he's a 4-star. So that would get them 5 out of 18. And then if they get the running back, that's 6 out of 19. And then if they somehow pull Hardy Watts, I think he is a 4-star too. So that would be 7. Yeah. They'd still be short. Now, again, you can have a Kevin Haywood, who right now is a 3-star, who percolates up. They may end up with that. But I feel like it's tough sledding for them right now to end up with, say, 11. Because they're going to need 10, 11, 12 4-stars to hit the ratio. And that's the one part that I'm going to be watching, is if they can find a way to crawl up and do that. Because it would be, again, what that just tells you is you're not hung up on any individual guy, right? Just like the quarterbacks. Like, that's why I think people had a very healthy reaction to Nick Evers. They were excited when the Badgers got him, and they were totally cool when he moved on, because it's like, hey, you got a shot with a 4-star guy here. Didn't work out. Best of luck. That's okay. Like, this is playing the numbers. And if they can just keep doing that, I think that's where you could actually see something pay off. So if they can find a way to get there, that would be great. I have a hard time seeing it because they did miss early on a lot of guys. Like, I feel like we have seen them go down the list a fair amount on dudes.
And if I recall correctly, one of the guys that they missed on, which the position group, of course, isn't represented, and much like national championship winners, I don't see any defensive line.
Yeah, well, that's so. The one thing you can hold out hope is if Ernest Willer was any less, like, he was not really on the mind at this point last year. I mean, he was a late addition, so there may be a guy that trickles down. We'll see, but to be determined. Although, as we're sitting here, I see the Badgers have booked a defensive lineman to head up this weekend, Kyler Garcia, so maybe there's a bye they get to throw at the problem there. Offered by Georgia, not like he's an 87 or something like that. So, I mean, not, out of the realm of sort of like a Jamel Howard pedigree, but
sure.
We'll see. To be determined.
Well, like I said, if you have, you can have an offer sheet or you can wrestle in high school. But as long as you're an interior defensive lineman, I'm happy.
Yes.
Sorry, and you have one of those other two things.
Yes. All right. So enough on that. Let's deal with what I've been working on for I feel like forever. So our friend of the show, I mean, like, I'm going to say not even friend of the show at this point.
Oh, beyond friend.
Like production assistant of the show.
Yeah.
Brendan. And I'm not going to mention Brendan's last name just because, the fame that comes with being mentioned on this podcast changes your life forever. But who is our resident database expert, was super nice and deserves thanks from all of you who are listening to this, as he was able to pull this. It's basically there's this database kept by these guys at the I think it's called like the CFB 4th down model or something like that. They run, if you've seen it, there's a Twitter account called 4th Down Bot, which I know if you're reasonably on college football Twitter, you've seen it, which is just this automated account that says, Western Illinois is playing, Akron. It's 4th and 4 from the 38. Model says go, don't punt. It's one of those kinds of accounts.
Right.
And so they have this database of play-by-play. And in it is, you can look at any kind of plays you want. And what I wanted to look at, and what Brendan was able to extract for me and for us, was basically every 4th down that Paul Chryst has had as head coach at Wisconsin and Luke Fickell has had as head coach. And then just for good measure, Jim Leonard as acting head coach, but his sample size is so small. So
just for completeness sake.
Yeah. So what he was able to do was pull every 4th down with a whole bunch of data points that I got to play around with for a few weeks, which is kind of why this took so long, because it was a spreadsheet with I don't know. It goes out to column AV. What's that? That's like
goes out
45.
No, it goes out to column AX.
Oh, that's right, because I cut some.
and it has 1,427 rows.
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of information. So it's it's more or less 1,400 individual plays, whole bunch of data on everyone, obvious ones you think of, down distance, time in the game, score difference, but then there's other pieces as well. And what I was curious to look at was look at basically Luke Fickell and what he does on 4th down, because this season, it is certainly fair to say, was at times it felt a little frustrating watching him. Like, you didn't really understand what he was doing. And it felt like he was really tight and really conservative. And you said, now, is that a function of who Luke Fickell is as a coach? Or is that a function of what this team is and what Luke Fickell thinks he can do with it? And then just for a basis of comparison, what I wanted to do was say, let's just look at him. We need something to compare him to. Because just having statistics and numbers don't really tell us a whole lot. It was like, what can we compare him to that can give us, just a broad sense of, what does this mean if Luke Fickell goes for it on fourth down X percentage of the time or on this down and distance? And I said, well, let's just do it against Chryst. Let's use Chryst as sort of like a known for us, right? Because we've watched Paul Chryst for, it was the better part of a decade, the head coach you watched. And I think the general consensus amongst Wisconsin fans, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I feel like he was a fairly conservative coach when it came to fourth downs. Not insanely conservative, but he was definitely more on the conservative side, especially early in his career.
I agree. I would agree with that, yes.
And so that was the first thing I did. And I'll kind of I did a whole bunch of, permutations of the data. And I was like, I'll walk you guys through it and sort of what I saw and maybe, I guess, conclusions I draw for what they are, or at least information we can give and then people can decide what they mean. So the first thing I did on a this was like a very, very basic baseline level. I said, let's take every single fourth down and see how often they went for it. How often these coaches decided to go for it on fourth down. Because that was one of the data points was, do they go for it? True or false, right? So Paul Chryst, from 2015 through when he was fired in 2022, had 661 fourth down opportunities. Luke Fickell, from 2017, when he became Cincinnati's head coach, and then through this past season in 2023 as Wisconsin head coach, had 708 fourth down opportunities. So their numbers are pretty close. And again, if people are curious, Jim Leonard had 57 as interim coach, which again, I just kind of threw them in there because I thought it was interesting and they were in the data set. So Paul Chryst, on those 661 fourth downs, went for it 126 times, which equals 19% of the time. Luke Fickell, on his 708 fourth downs, went for it 205 times, or 29% of the time. And just for reference, I'm going to keep everything whole numbers so we don't lose our brains. Jim Leonard, in his short stint as head coach, only went for it 14% of the time. So of the three of them, again, his isn't as big a deal. He was at 14, Chryst was at 19, Fickell was at 28. So you look at that and you say, oh, Fickell way more aggressive.
The only thing I will say about Leonard, though, is you have the Northwestern game, the Purdue game, which they won 35-17. I think, or 35-21, excuse me. The Maryland game, which was that slot fest in Camp Randall, which they won 23-3. And then the wacko Nebraska game, which was, I think, 15-6, 15-8, or something like that. So
don't get too caught up in him. But
I was just going to say, or 15-14 is actually what it was. Yeah. So, I mean, there's not, I wouldn't, I don't think you can take it. I don't think there's any statistical relevance to Leonard's numbers at all.
So
what's my point? Yeah.
What's interesting about Chryst is to end up at that 19% go rate. You have to use his, which again ties into what we said at the top. His first 3 years as head coach, his go rate was 12% in 2015, 15% in 2016, and then 2017, your winner is 9% go rate. So his first 3 years were his lowest go rates. In 2019, when he had arguably, I guess would you say that was the best offense he had? I mean, I think that's fair to say, right?
I think so. Yeah.
2019 was also tied for his highest go rate at 28%. It also tied with 2020, but 2020 is kind of wonky. Nothing we can do about it. Anyways, so you definitely get the sense when the guy liked his team and he liked his offense, guess what? He went more, right? Luke Fickell.
There's that. And the one that I really wanted to look at was the one that I think really rankled fans. It was when they were down 31-7 against Ohio State.
Oh, in 22. Or no, that was 21. Or was that 22? Was that 22?
It was 22.
Yeah.
It was 22.
Well,
I'm looking at that one in particular, though, and it doesn't really stand out in terms of being, there's a go recommendation. The model says go, but it's the strength is toss up.
We're going to get to that in a little bit.
But that's the one when everybody thinks of Paul Chryst.
Yeah. Well, no, the one I think people think of is the Minnesota one where he had to take the timeout. And it was they lined up to punt.
In 21.
Yeah. where they lined up to punt. I mean, that's the one to me. That's the real the kill. I mean, like, I get the Ohio State one, but I kind of said whatever. They weren't going to win that game anyways. I mean, I get the point. You got to fight to get back in the game, but they weren't getting back in that game anyways. They were dead. But the Minnesota one was pretty bad because he had to take the timeout because he realized he screwed it up. But what's interesting is, so yeah, he peaked in 2019, 2020 at 28%. And then in 2022, when he's in the midst of his Graham Mertz ennui, where it's just, you can't throw the ball, don't trust the guy, back down to 20%. Really interesting to me. So
that's got to be a t-shirt.
Graham Mertz ennui. Well, we could do that. But so compare that to Fickell, right? So Fickell is at 29%. He's just under 29% go rate through his career. His highest go rate is 2021 when they went for it 34% of the time. Big surprise. They were in the college football playoff.
Well, not only that though, I was thinking that the early Fickell years at Cincinnati wouldn't be as relevant until he got his guys in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the 2021 year I have kind of highlighted because, I mean, yeah, you have the playoff, but you also have Notre Dame. And it looks like there were 9 fourth downs against Notre Dame and nothing really relevant in that game.
Yeah.
There's 4 punts, 6 punts, a made field goal, 2 missed field goals, which, those were field goal ones, right?
Right.
And then the only one that was a rush was a fumble.
Yeah.
And it looks like it was from midfield. So like 46 yards to go to the goal.
Yeah.
And Desmond Ridder fumbled it. Desmond Ridder, NFL quarterback.
Right. But it makes sense to go. Yeah.
It made sense to go, but that's kind of the one that I would think like you'd be more aggressive in those bigger games, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would think, although they controlled a lot of that game against North.
Yeah. So to that point, what's interesting about him is looking at his higher and lower go rates. Mm-hmm. His lowest go rate in his career was 2023 as Wisconsin head coach. 24% of the time.
Oh my gosh.
He has his second lowest, 2017, when he had a 4-8 Cincinnati team.
Oh, well, there you go. Huh?
You get a sense, I think that's probably all of these coaches,
yeah,
when their comfort level with their team isn't super high, that's when they're less likely to say, oh, well, the math says go, right? I think they just get a little more nervous about things.
Sure.
So I looked at all this and I said, okay, yeah, Luke Fickell definitely more aggressive, right? 9% of the time more on more or less the same number of snaps. But then I said to myself, wait a minute. There's such a lack of context in this, right? Because if it's 4th and 30 and you're on your own 5-yard line,
mm-hmm.
I shouldn't be impressed that you went for it, right?
No.
So the next thing I did was I said, well, what is like a big picture thing that we could look at to say, like, what gives you a truer picture of how aggressive this guy is as a coach? And I said, oh, well, I know one. If Paul Chryst is up 2 touchdowns, he's punting. Like, you knew that because he had a dominant defense. Probably was even the right call. Or maybe Luke Fickell is doing the same thing.
Control of the game.
Yeah, they're not run-up guys. So the next thing I did was I also said, well, wait a minute. Also, if they're losing by 14, who cares if they're going for it on 4th and 5? They're supposed to. Like, every coach is doing that, right? Except maybe Paul Chryst, to your point, against Ohio State. But let's just eliminate all that. So I said, let's just take 4th downs where they're within 14 points of each other. They're either winning by 14 or losing by 14 or something in between, right? So that 28-point bracket. And I then cut it down to those snaps. So that gave you 543 for Chryst, 567 for Fickell. So it basically, again, trims out about the same number of plays. You end up with Chryst going for it 19% of the time, actually 18.9. I wasn't going to use a decimal, but it only goes down slightly. And you get Fickell going for it 26% of the time. So he actually drops 3% or 2%. Sorry. He goes from 29 to 27. Chryst really drops like a fraction of a percent. So it doesn't really change anything. which I thought was interesting. So then I said to myself, all right, well, that's not helping me much. So the next thing I said, all right, I got an idea. I got a really simple idea. I am going to say, let's see every 4th down and 4 or less. So 4th and 4, 4th and 3, you got the idea. And less than or equal to 60 yards to go. So from your own 40 in, 60 yards to score. And I said, let's just look at them through that lens. Mm-hmm. Now, Chryst gets a major bump. He now goes for it 46% of the time in that situation. Again, going back early in his career, 2015, he only went for it 38% of the time, but from 2019 on, he's pretty much 50% or better. Fickell, however, also gets a bump. He now goes for it 75% of the time. The lowest time in his career, you get one guess. This is a theme. 2023. He only went for it 56% of the time. Every other year in his career.
2017 or 2023.
You got it. And you know what? His second lowest, to your point, 2017. 70% of the time he went there. In 2021, he went 81. In 2018, he went 92% of the time in that situation. And if you lower it even more, like you see, like let's make it 35 yards to go. Chryst doesn't really go up. He's still 45% of the time. Fickell is just under 80. Like there is you see a constant trend. Now also that number starts to change because they start kicking field goals, right? So it goes, you see like, again, not necessarily that one of them is right or wrong, but you definitely see that Fickell is on average a more aggressive coach than Paul Chryst. Now, I still was like, I feel like I'm picking such a weird criteria, right? Just like I picked one in my head that's like, what's an obvious one that we all scream and yell about as fans these days? And that's that, sort of like 4th and more than inches, but not quite, long. And why aren't you going? And you're going to get it 40% of the time, yada, yada, yada. So the one thing that we have in this model, which you touched on a little bit before, was starting in 2019, they created, these guys down at CFP 4th Down, they created a calculation on every 4th down of what should a team do. Should they kick a field goal? Should they go for it? Should they punt? Or is it a toss-up? Anything before 2019 doesn't really use this model. So I said, okay, let's start with 2019. And let's look at every time, for instance, every time Paul Chryst hit a 4th down where he should kick a field goal. And I said, how often did he go? There were 37 plays, which isn't a ton, but 37 plays in that period of time that were field goal plays. He went for a field goal 84% of the time. Luke Fickell, in that period of time, interestingly enough, had significantly more. He had 70, so double the number of plays. He kicked a field goal 73% of the time, so a lower rate, about 10% less than Chryst. Now, in that same stretch, so 2019 through 2022, and I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers, so I'm trying not to talk too fast, Paul Chryst had 123 plays where the model said, go for it. He went for it 54% of the time. Interestingly enough, Fickell had 212, again, more plays, but he had a go recommendation on 212. He did not go for it. He punted 55% of the time. So they were basically lined up. So in both situations, when they should go, they both went for it slightly less than 50% of the time. So the model gets interesting as you get into these situations.
It does, yeah. Well, it gives you apples to apples comparisons,
right? And it doesn't. The big thing I'd say to take from this, it's not that I take this go, no-go model as a piece of gospel. All it really does for me is it gives me like a baseline to compare them. It doesn't mean one, like the model, they're not listening to the model. It just means like, how do they compare against this constant, right? That,
apples to apples.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that they're not as far off as you thought. The only other place that there is a little bit of difference is on the punt model. So Paul Chryst faced 109 4th downs where it said to punt. He punted on 103 of them, or 95% of the time. Luke Fickell faced 209. He punted on 185, which is 88%, actually 89% of the time. So he went for it a little bit more. So basically, he would opt out of the field goal for going for it a little more often, and he'd opt out of the punt and go for it a little bit often. But when it was time to go, they kicked. I'm assuming it was well, you don't know if it was a field goal or a punt, but they both went for it less than 50% of the time, both about 45%. So they aren't quite as different in the broad scope, but in the simple ones that you and I, thumbless fan who's like 4th and 4 from the 45, go. Like he's much more likely to go and get you off his back.
Yeah, right. No, which I think that's a really good result of this exercise. I have 2 observations. Okay. The first one is an easy one, but I think it would be interesting to see where Kirk Ferentz comes in on this in these numbers. Well, no, just because he's like the the paradigmatic,
right?
Punting is winning, right? And I'd like to see how the numbers compare because my guess is that they're probably not that far off.
I bet he's, it's like a 10%, right? Difference?
Yeah, like the variance isn't like crazy until maybe these past 2 years with a very mediocre offense, a stellar defense, and America's best punter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's some other considerations there. Okay. So that's one of them. The other one is that you're talking about 2019 because I think one of the really cool rows in here is row U, at least the way that you've set this up, is drive results.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm going to look at the 2019 for Chryst. You had almost, where did it go? I had these filtered up by color. Dang it.
Take your time because I'm going to put for Cody to clean up all the
difference. Yeah. So you have, I don't have it set up so that I can tell what drive it was. Okay. But there are, as far as drive result in 2019, out of the times when Chryst went for it, drive result is touchdown 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. And then where there wasn't, there was field goal, field goal, field goal, field goal. So that's 4 of those. There's, get this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fumbles. Jonathan Taylor. 6 fumbles. 2 of them against Illinois, I think, right? Or on 4th down?
I think that's right.
I'm 99% sure. So let's go to 23 with Fickell. Not a single touchdown when he went for it on 4th down. The drive, not a single drive resulted in a touchdown.
Yeah.
So that's something. Take from that what you will. I'm still trying to process what I'm taking from that, but take from that what you will. There was only 2 field goals that resulted from those. And they don't appear to be, they weren't in the same game. So it's not the same drive.
Yeah.
And then there was 2 fumbles, one by Braden Locke. I think that's against Illinois, I want to say. And then the other one by Braylon Allen, which I think was the Ohio State one. Does that sound right? Or Iowa? It is Iowa. Yeah, Iowa. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, not a single touchdown on any of the drives where you went for it on 4th down. That really tells you how this offense is last season, especially compared to 2019 offense. Like that is like a universe of difference, isn't it?
Yeah. Let me circle back to that question because that was sort of what I think where I end. It ties into how I end up after spending too much time poking around at this.
Sure.
Because
I just think it's a cool column.
Yeah. No, it is because so here's the thing because I kept looking because I kept saying like, well, I feel like maybe Fickell would be more aggressive, but maybe he isn't because of that last one where it's like, well, on the model, they basically line up. But I thought it was just so like I looked at, okay, well, maybe it's just when they kick, right? Because when they kick field goals. So I took every play where they attempted, it could be a field goal that was blocked, a field goal made, field goal missed. Didn't matter. Just a play that had a field goal, right? And when they kicked field goals, 64% of the time, the model said kick a field goal when it was Paul Chryst. When it was Luke Fickell, only 57% of the time, the model said kick a field goal. It actually said, it said go for it, almost 40, slightly higher than Chryst, which I thought was interesting. So it was like, oh, maybe this guy is a little bit, that's where Chryst is catching up on that model. It's on those field goals where Fickell is more willing to take the long kick and lean on his defense, which I would think would be, I'm doing it backwards. Chryst, it's what I thought. Chryst would lean on the field goal and Fickell is more likely to go, but it could also be, you never know if that's a product of the kicker because the kick model to kick the field goal is independent of the player. It's just like a global probability.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe Chryst, when he says, I've got an above average kicker, I'm going to kick. So he's more likely to lean in the kick when Fickell's going to go.
How often did he though?
There were some of those 50-yarders where you're like, I feel like...
No. That's not what I'm saying. How often did he have an above average kicker?
I guess
Chryst did not have good kickers.
Didn't have great kickers, no.
There's no Philip Welts in there.
But I think there's
Taylor Melham.
It's still his philosophy.
Yeah, which is interesting because I think what if he had even a Vacos, right?
Right.
I think that ratio would probably go up even more.
Yeah,
with a longer field goal.
But that's kind of where I feel like the difference came in is that even if the model there doesn't say go, the model says kick the field goal, and that's where Fickell would be more aggressive.
Sure.
So that would make that's where he is a more aggressive coach in that respect. But in the end, like then the last one I looked at was the punt. When the model said punt, how often did they punt? And they both punted 67% of the time. Now Fickell had more opportunities at 280. Or 279 versus Chryst with 161, again, since 2019. But they both punted 67% of the time.
Oh, man. So here's something for you. Let's look at 2018 because 2018, Chryst only went for it a grand total of 18 times. And that's kind of an offense that you think of as not being that good and a defense that was down from most of the Chryst era.
Mm-hmm.
And out of those, there were actually 3 drives that wound up in touchdowns and one with a field goal.
Yeah, it's a funny one. I mean,
it really is. I think that's the most fascinating column, though. I have to say, because what's the result?
Well,
right? I mean, you go for it on 4th down, it's great, but like if you don't get points out of it, then what the hell are you doing? You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think the one that really epitomizes it, if you want to look at a Chryst team, which is 2017. They only went for it 8 times that year. On 85 4th downs, they went for it 9.5% of the time. And that was the team, that was the Alex Hornibrook special, right? Yeah. That was the defense digging out, interceptions. And you realize that's a guy playing a team super duper tight. And
well, look at that too, because out of the 8 times they went for it, there's 5 drives that wound up in a touchdown.
And it paid off.
Wow.
And so that's what I circled back to with all the stuff again, what does this mean about Fickell? And I keep coming back to that post-game press conference where Fickell said, there are times that I've gone for it and it didn't work. And then there's times I've punted to try to put my defense in position and we punt the ball out of bounds and we don't flip the field. And you just feel like you can't make the right decision ever. And I really do feel like the lesson to take from Fickell and his behavior on 4th down this last year was it's just a guy who was never comfortable with this team. It was kind of the thing we started to suspect towards the end of the season.
Yeah.
They don't really get what it is. That's what this is. And I think if you're of the mindset, this guy's going to end up being a really tight, conservative guy on 4th down in perpetuity. If that's the case, I think it's because the team never gets better. He never gets comfortable with the offense.
For sure.
And if his offense starts to come around, I think he's going to turn those dials. And that's where I end up. It's just, this is a statistical way to, just the way this past season as head coach is an outlier to all of his prior seasons, save for the last time he had a 4-8 team. It just tells me that it was a guy who wasn't comfortable with the team. The numbers tell me that story, if it makes sense.
Well, if you went for it a total of 26 times this past season, and then if you take Chryst went for it a total of 18 in 2018 and then 8 in 2017, I mean, that kind of stands out.
Yeah.
But I don't know, because don't you think, if you look at this chart, 27 times going for it seems like a lot.
It does, but you also have to look at the number of downs. So the number of times they had 4th downs. What I think is interesting is Chryst only had triple-digit 4th downs twice, in 2015 and 2016. Fickell had them in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2022, and 2023. And then in
Double
2021,
Double digit.
no, they had triple, over 100.
Oh,
So-
just total fourth downs. Yeah.
So
I'm talking about I'm talking about fourth down attempts.
I understand. And what I'm
Yeah.
saying is,
The
I
percentage.
think Fickell had an offense that was just designed to run more plays, right? I mean, you're dealing with Chryst and a pace of play that's different stylistically.
Very true. Very true there.
And,
Yes.
Even though it wasn't a Phil Longo spread at the time, Phil Longo's numbers from this last year weren't an aberration compared to past years. It was 112 fourth downs. In 2019, they had 116. In 2022, they had 108. You know what I mean? Like, it's not far off.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I see.
So I sit there and I just say, again, the end of the story for me and my last thought on it is that it's just the guy who wasn't comfortable with the team. So we'll see what it looks like in 2024. If they're more aggressive, it tells me he's more comfortable with the team.
Well, and I think if you track this out and you got halfway through and you had at least 1, 2, 3 drives that ended up in the touchdown after going for it on fourth down, that might, you know what I mean? If you start off well and they're effective in the game, the flow of the game, there's probably more momentum to carry it through.
For sure.
Right?
For sure.
Because to me, looking at these numbers, it's astounding that not any one of the times that they went for it on fourth down, that not one single drive wound up in a touchdown.
Well, and I think
that's astounding.
And I think that's also, if you looked at him, he got tighter as the year went on. And I think it's just because he never got a good result. All right, Max.
Crazy.
So
okay. Well, yeah, we had plenty to talk about.
We had a lot of numbers
as it
there.
turns out.
And hey, if anybody thinks we're missing something or has like, hey, what about this or what about that? Ask it. I mean, there are so many data points in this thing. It has win probabilities in it that I didn't really mess with.
No, or wants to do or wants to throw Kirk Ferentz into the mix.
Well, that one we'd have to pull. I'd have to get Brennan to do another poll on that. But yeah, just let us know if there's a different way like that I didn't think of to look at this, because there might be something that I'm totally missing. I have debated putting this thing on the Patreon just so people could poke around in it and pivot to their heart's delight. But I have it all in, like my final thing again is in my annoying Mac spreadsheet program that I talk about on this too much. But the Numbers app is awesome and I love using it.
Yeah.
And so I am unpopular that way. But anyways, maybe we're missing something. We're back next week. We will do a big picture, and then I is going to do a little digging on official visits, which I think I mentioned earlier in the show.
Yes.
I want to do or maybe that was just you and me talking. I'm not sure. But do a sort of a comparison over the years to see if we can see any trends there, something similar. But anything else, Max? We somehow ended up at almost an hour. This is insane.
No, I don't. But yeah, we'll get started on our normal off-season schedule.
The non-playing portion.
The non-playing portion, and then the other thing too is that I think the preview guides start to come out at the end of the month, so I think
Max has his Phil Steele.
It's gonna start getting exciting. Got to take it on your 4th of July vacation.
All right, have a good week, everybody.
All right, talk to you later. Till next time.
Enjoy the conversation? Head on over to BuckAroundPodcast.com to find all the ways to connect with the show, links to our Patreon page, and feeds for every major podcasting platform. We want to thank each and every one of our patrons. You make this podcast possible. This has been the BuckAround, Badger football analysis from a fan perspective.